Hello, everyone. As you join in, please use the chat to introduce yourselves. You can include your name, organization, and region if you would like. Use the chat function at the bottom of the menu. You can find interpretation at the bottom menu. It is the globe icon. We have French interpretation as well as Spanish interpretation. Apologies for my hoarseness in my voice. We have friends and colleagues from Miami, from South Africa, from Canada, from New York, joining us so far. Okay, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is about the decriminalization of global homelessness. We're going to start off with a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded to be shared in follow-up communications. We have Spanish interpretation. Sorry, that's a typo. We also have French interpretation. If you use the icon at the bottom of your menu, also continue to use the chat to introduce yourselves, to discuss anything you like, to share your ideas. You can use the separate Q&A function to submit questions that you have for the panel to be shared during the Q&A segment during the second half of the webinar. And then the agenda is the introduction, the panel presentations, and then the Q&A segment. Sorry. Just a few acknowledgements. We wanted to highlight the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work to end homelessness. We acknowledge that structural and systemic racism looks different globally, but there is an undeniable correlation between racism and homelessness. And homelessness disproportionately affects Black and Brown people and people of marginalized communities throughout the world. That's pretty consistent in various regions. And we are committed to actively working to counter racism and inequities in the sector. We also want to acknowledge the land that IGH sits on. It is the land of the Council of the Three Fires, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chippewa. And you can use this link to find the native land that you work on or live on. Our panel today, our distinguished panel, we are joined by Samantha Blondeau from the Research for Social Change Lab. We are joined by Gabriela Valentín Díaz of the Miami Human Rights Clinic and EarthRights International. And we're also joined by Wilmy Dessalines of the Human Rights Clinic at the University of Miami School of Law. Myself and my colleague Lydia will be helping to moderate, and we also have interpretation by Leticia Perez and Emmanuel Onguvu. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. And just a little background about IGH. IGH was founded in 2014. It is an organization based in Chicago, USA, housed at DePaul University. And it is the first organization to focus on homelessness as a global phenomenon with an emphasis on street homelessness. And that includes people living on the streets or in emergency shelters. We have a tagline, See It, Solve It, Share It, which encompasses our three areas of work. So we advocate for international homelessness policy, focus on definition and measurement of homelessness. We partner with cities and countries who have goals to prevent and homelessness in their regions. And we convene with other practitioners and organizations to exchange knowledge to help inform the work. And just a quick overview of, and I'm sure our expert panelists will expand on this, but just a quick somewhat definition of what it means to criminalize homelessness. It's acts carried out typically by local authorities to arrest or fine people who are living on the streets. And this includes creating and enforcing policies that deem homelessness to be illegal, deem panhandling or sharing resources with people experiencing homelessness to be illegal. It also includes things such as sweeps. So when tent encampments are dismantled and belongings of people experiencing homelessness are confiscated, and things like that. So that's just a quick description of the criminalization of homelessness. Um, and I will stop sharing my screen. Also, just a quick reminder to our lovely panel to, I probably was not doing this, but to try to speak at a pretty moderate pace for our interpreters. And with that, I will hand it over to our first speaker, Sam Blondeau, who will be presenting about criminalization in Canada, and we will share their bio in the chat. Over to you, Sam.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Blondeau. I use they, them pronouns. I am a second year interdisciplinary social research PhD student at Trent University. I also work under the supervision of Dr. Naomi Nichols, a primary investigator at the Research for Social Change Lab. She is also my my PhD supervisor. So I am going to turn my camera off and I'm going to share my screen. Alrighty. So today I am going to talk about trends in the criminalization of homelessness in Canada. I'm going to focus more on like what I like to call the neo-vagrancy era, which is 2000 to present. Now, keep in mind, this is a very general overview. I can't get into too much detail in the amount of time that I have. So I'm going to talk about the general overview of the history of vagrancy law in Canada. Then I'm going to talk about the birth of neo-vagrancy in Canada and some of the subsequent legal cases that have challenged the constitutional nature of those laws, as well as the rise of the criminalization of helpers. And then I'm going to end with highlighting some of the positive changes that we have seen in the last decade concerning the state of the criminalization of homelessness. So we're going to try to end on a better note than we start, is my goal. So the Vagrancy Act in Canada was created in 1824, which interestingly enough was prior to the creation of the Canadian Criminal Code. In 1892, the Vagrancy Act stated that loose and idle or disorderly person as a vagrant could be subjected to a maximum fine of $50 or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months with or without hard labor. The legal definition of vagrancy, the condition of not having a lawful profession or means to financially maintain yourself, and it's usually accompanied by being homeless. And in Canada, in 1970, this legislation went through another change where things were added to it. No loitering near schools, playgrounds, public parks, or bathing areas. And these were prosecuted as summary convictions. And under this law, anyone who supported themselves by gaming or crime or who had no lawful profession or calling by which to maintain himself could have been charged with vagrancy. In 1972, all three political parties at the time agreed that the Vagrancy Act should be repealed from the Canadian Criminal Code, understanding that not having employment was no longer a reason to throw somebody in jail. However, it took until about 2019 before the Vagrancy Act was completely repealed from the Canadian Criminal Code. And as that process was happening, Canada was gearing up to create new legislation as a measure to address what was coined as the squeegee kid phenomenon. So in the mid-late to 1990s, it was common to see street kids with squeegee kids in hand offering to wash windows at corners in the hopes of getting some spare change. The summer of 1997 saw a significant increase in squeegee kids across Canada, and this increase in squeegee kids coincided with a reported rise in aggressive behavior. With this increase in reported aggressive behavior stemming from squeegee workers, The Premier of Ontario at the time, Mike Harris, proposed provincial legislation that would seek to address the squeegee kid problem through prohibiting aggressive panhandling. And in 2000, the Ontario Safe Streets Act received royal assent, and squeegee kids were effectively criminalized. The Ontario Safe Streets Act prohibited aggressive panhandling and includes fines up to $500 for your first offense, and on a subsequent conviction, a fine of no more than $1,000 or imprisonment of a term up to no more than 6 months or both. The Ontario Safe Streets Act also gave the police power to arrest without a warrant. And this was the very first neo-vagrancy act that was created in Canada, and it had a lot of vocal critiques when the legislation was being passed. We consider these neo-vagrancy laws because these laws are reviving a key archaic purpose to the vagrancy law, which was to punish visible poverty, because people who live in poverty have no place but in the public. Within 4 years of the Ontario Safe Streets Act being created, the British Columbia followed suit and created their own carbon copy version, the BC Safe Streets Act. So as of right now, Canada effectively has 2 provinces with provincial neo-vagrancy laws. And other types of neo-vagrancy laws that can be found are in municipal bylaws. And in Canada, over 75% of Canadian municipalities had neo-vagrancy laws in 2020, according to a study done by Hermer and Frontenac. Other types, municipalities often include neo-vagrancy style ordinances in their parks and facilities bylaws because the restrictions can be framed as an issue concerning access to parks for the community rather than an intentionally directed neo-vagrancy law. So some of these vagrancy laws consist of no panhandling, no obstructing, disorderly, sheltering, salvaging, loitering, and resting or sleeping. Now in Canada, since 2007, there have been a number of legal challenges against municipalities for enforcing the neo-vagrancy aspects of their parks and facilities bylaws. Arguably, the neo-vagrancy laws that are most well known across Canada are the ones that prohibit tenting or erecting shelter on public property. So much so that there have been several legal challenges brought forward, and the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate completed a human rights investigation into encampments across Canada in 2021, with their final report launching in 2024. One of the key recommendations that came from the report was urging the Canadian federal government to immediately decriminalize all homelessness across Canada. Unfortunately, we have yet to see any action on this recommendation. However, there have been some significant gains when it comes to the legal challenges I'm going to talk about here. So in 2007, the British Columbia ruling confirmed that people experiencing homelessness have the right to erect shelter to protect themselves from the elements while sleeping outside. Madam Justice Ross found that the City of Victoria lacked sufficient shelter spaces to house more than 1,000 people experiencing homelessness, and preventing them from having minimal shelter violated Section 7 of the Charter. In 2023, the City of Waterloo attempted to get the courts to grant them permission to evict an encampment that had been growing since 2021. Justice M.J. Valentín denied the application and declared that the bylaw was inoperative insofar and only insofar as it applies to prevent the residents of the encampment from living on and erecting temporary shelters without a permit on the property when the number of homeless persons exceeds the number of available accessible shelter beds in the region. And the Waterloo decision effectively established a framework to guide encampment evictions. Kingston saw a similar ruling in 2023 after the City of Kingston applied for an injunction to be able to evict the encampment at Bell Park. Justice Ian Carter found that the city's ban on overnight sheltering was unconstitutional, and in his decision added an exception to the bylaw allowing people who are homeless to temporarily put up shelters in parks during the night. The ruling from Justice Ian Carr stipulated that people could erect shelters in public parks during the night, and in 2024, the City of Kingston started to enforce that stipulation, and encampment residents were expected to pack up their tent and belongings every day. Communities, sorry. And then we move on to the Hamilton decision, where in 2024, Judge Ramsey ruled that Hamilton did not violate the Section 7 rights of people living in encampments when they were evicted. Justice James Ramsey went on to give harsh judgment. The public is generally sympathetic to the homeless, but it tires of seeing its public spaces appropriated by useless, unsanitary encampments. He observed the most vulnerable includes not only the homeless, but also the elderly person and the child who want to use a sidewalk or city park without tiptoeing through used needles and human feces. The city successfully was able to leverage the argument that it didn't evict encampment residents at night, only during the day. Therefore, it didn't stop people from creating shelter, according to Ramsey, in the form of tents when indoor shelters were full. Lawyers from the legal clinic presented evidence to the court trying to explain the increased risk of hypothermia, dehydration, sexual and physical assault, and loss of access to privacy, medical care, and essential items they'd otherwise have if they were allowed to pitch tents. Justice Ramsey said they are put at risk by homelessness. Encampments contribute to this risk. They are lawless, dangerous, and unsanitary. We can see from the Hamilton decision that the courts are still not settled on how to interpret the Section 7 challenges. Now, unfortunately, we've also seen a rise in the criminalization of the helpers. So, and in addition to increased reliance on neo-vagrancy laws across Canada that criminalize homelessness, there's been a rise in situations where the helpers and advocates are being criminalized. In 2023, Barrie was in the spotlight for a proposed change to their parks and facilities bylaw that would prohibit anyone from providing food or distributing any items on public property. The community response to the proposed change garnered the attention of the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate, the National Right to Housing Network, and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, amongst other community groups and legal professionals. And it was subsequently sent back to city staff to be rewritten. On January 10th, 2023, Brandy Morin, an Indigenous reporter, was arrested while she was covering a high-profile sweep at an encampment in Edmonton. She was charged with obstruction of justice when she refused to leave the encampment while sweeps were being conducted. In March of 2024, the obstruction charges had been dropped. And in 2024, Peterborough enforced the Parks and Facilities bylaw and issued a ticket to the Peterborough chapter of Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs negotiated with the city of Peterborough and a compromise was agreed upon. The amendment was made to the existing Parks and Facilities bylaw that gave an exemption to Food Not Bombs to operate without a ticket. However, the city also changed the structure of the fines associated with the bylaw infractions. They were changed to administrative penalty and they start now at $175 a day the first day and $275 each day after the contravention of bylaw if you had a permit. Those fines jumped to
Permiso,
$500 a
estos
day the first
fondos
day and $750
brincaban
every day after
aquí
if you
a
don't have a permit.
$500 y si no tienen un permiso era el
But
costo que
I
les
don't want to leave
costaba.
you with all doom and gloom,
Entonces no
so we're
quiero
going to talk a
dejarles
little bit
aquí todo
about some of
esto,
the progress and some
pero
of the
vamos a
things
ver
that
todo
we
el
have going for
progreso que
us
hemos hecho
in
hasta
Canada
ahorita
that are hopefully
aquí en
going to
Canadá.
lead us down
Ojalá que sí
decriminalization.
nos puedan ayudar mucho con esto de
The National
discriminación.
Housing Strategy in
Entonces,
Canada
esta
is currently a
estrategia,
10-year,
esos
$115
son
billion
cien,
plan. In
de un plan.
2017, the
En
Canadian federal government
2027
announced Canada's first
también
federal housing
anunció
strategy, along with a
trabajar con
commitment for more
diferentes
housing and the
estrategias,
revamping of the existing federal homeless
también
funding
de
programs,
cómo
formerly
poder
known as the
trabajar
Homeless Good
diferentes
Strategy,
fondos,
and included the commitment to
y
create the
también
National
puede
Housing Strategies
incluir
Act. In
trabajar
2019, the
con
National
esta
Housing
ley.
Strategies Act was created.
2010 esto
The
fue creado, y
NHSA
al
included
final
the
de
creation of the Office of the Federal
NHACA
Housing
con
Advocate, the
diferentes
Housing Council, and a
oficinas,
recognition and commitment to
y de
including the
cómo poder
expertise of people
trabajar
with lived
con las
experience in homelessness
personas que
and the
sí pueden
policy decisions
trabajar
that
y
impact
diferentes
their
pólizas que
lives.
impactan
The
sus
NHSA
vidas.
states, and
Y
whereas the
también
National Housing
aquí,
Strategy
ahora,
to support
de
the progressive
trabajar con estas
realization of the right to adequate
estrategias,
housing as recognized
y
in the
también de
International Covenant on
reconocer,
Economic,
de
Social, and
cómo
Cultural
poder
Rights, to which
trabajar
Canada is a
con
party.
estos derechos,
Effectively, the National Housing Strategies
también
Act
aquí.
ensures the progressive human right to housing for all Canadians. And in 2024, after almost a quarter of a century, the Ontario Safe Streets Act was effectively gutted and found to be unconstitutional on the following grounds. While squeegeeing is still effectively criminalized, significant parts of the Ontario Safe Streets Act were found to be unconstitutional. Soliciting is of a fundamental importance to a person's in need and has a real social value. Even if the presence of persons soliciting is annoying or even offensive, a blanket ban on all solicitations is not a proportional limit on freedom of expression. The mere presence of homeless persons soliciting gifts from persons doing certain things at a prohibited site does not, on its own and without more, pose any danger or impediment to the safe use of public space. The judge also struck down most of the section of the ban soliciting in an aggressive manner. He removed most activities the act says constitute aggressiveness, including obstructing a person's path, following them, using abusive language, soliciting while intoxicated, and persistently soliciting a person after they've declined to give money. Fair Change, which is the legal group that brought the challenge forward, also argued that the act is a waste of public resources, pointing out that between 2000 and 2010, Toronto police issued over 67,000 tickets, worth just over $4 million in fines. Yet only about $8,000 was collected. The hope is this ruling will lead to a decrease in people experiencing homelessness receiving tickets for simply asking for some spare change to help them survive. Then we have communities like Kingston and Peterborough, Ontario, that have worked to create modular units as a response to a rise in encampments, and both communities imposed moratoriums on their tenting prohibitions while the modular units were being constructed. In September of 2023, while the city of Peterborough is working on from a human rights lens to create a modular housing program, there was a moratorium on the bylaw enforcement that created a de facto sanctioned encampment site for the people who were waiting to be admitted into those units. The moratorium stayed in effect until the modular units were ready for people to move in. And Halifax has decided to stop evicting encampments, and they have decided to adopt a human rights-based approach where they have committed to a complete moratorium on evictions and created designated encampment spaces until there is enough housing to offer everyone who needs it. And this was recently reaffirmed on March 5th after a fire at one of the encampments where the city maintained their commitment to not enforcing encampment evictions until there is enough housing to provide to everybody that is in need. So we may still be in the neo-vagrancy era, but we've also embarked on the road to the progressive realization of housing as a human right in Canada. And I'm hopeful that the National Housing Strategies Act and all that comes with it, in combination with the mountains of grassroots efforts across the nation, that will refine the off-ramp from the criminalization of homelessness towards the human right to housing for all Canadians. And I am done now.
Thank you, Sam. Great presentation. I love the mention of, well, I don't love the mention of punishing poverty or visible poverty, but it just made me think of how there's so much data that suggests that homelessness and poverty is a systemic issue, and then the same system wants to punish people for being in poverty. So just to highlight that, and the mention of the waste of resources, ticketing people and just using money to arrest people could definitely be used to help them instead. So thank you. I think next we have Gabriela Valentín Díaz. We will share her bio in the chat as well. Handing it over to you, Gabriela.
Thanks, Tiffany, and thanks, Sam, because I think that a lot of what you're mentioning, especially the criminalization of poverty, is very relevant to what was present and what was found through the investigation of the report that will, I believe, also be shared, that I drafted called The Criminalization of Homelessness in the Caribbean, which provides a baseline report of 3 countries in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. So I'll be picking up on a lot of the threads you put down. I didn't create a PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna chat about it and refer you to the report to look at any of these points more in detail. But just to provide some context, this baseline report was developed with the University of Miami Human Rights Clinic, and it really just scratches the surface of the complex issue of homelessness in a complex region, the Caribbean. The report was done from a human rights centric approach, and so it focuses on what governments can and should do to address the criminalization of homelessness and their experiences in their respective countries. Each country report provides a brief historical background. It also provides information on the legal framework of each country, including its international obligations, a narrative description of homelessness in each country and some of the aspects or identities that are impacted by that, and an exploration of some of the causes, and of course, analysis of both laws criminalizing homelessness and protective laws, which there are some in some of these countries. So while the report certainly analyzes the laws that do criminalize homelessness, it became apparent that it's almost impossible to do a report just on the criminalization of homelessness through laws, because there's just so many other ways that governments and society condemn people for experiencing homelessness or being at risk of experiencing homelessness, and generally people in poverty, which eventually places people and individuals in the criminal system. So this report really goes to some of the ways that laws and societies target people experiencing homelessness, are at the risk of experiencing homelessness directly, other times without naming it, or are drafted in a way that is not necessarily intended to impact people experiencing homelessness, but can be weaponized against them. So when you look at the Caribbean, you see such a diverse history, diverse cultures and people, and I think that's really also reflected in the information we gathered. We researched the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico, and with these three countries alone, you encounter different languages, different legal systems, different attitudes from governments when it comes to people in poverty or people experiencing homelessness. But the investigation also revealed a lot of common themes and interesting threads between the countries. And so I'm just going to first provide some general thoughts of the links between homelessness and the criminalization of homelessness in the Caribbean, and then spend a couple of minutes highlighting some of the issues in each country and potential opportunities for governments to course correct. So one of the major threads identified is really the pervasiveness of colonialism and coloniality in exacerbating both homelessness, poverty, and its criminalization. One clear example of that is the laws that criminalize homelessness in the Dominican Republic's Penal Code. They don't just criminalize homelessness, they criminalize vagrancy, life-sustaining activities, and other acts, and they come directly from the French Napoleonic Code. When I was speaking to advocates, they noted that it's a literal direct translation. And so these provisions that punish people for poverty are extremely outdated, literally having been adopted in the early 1800s, before these countries had the ability to govern themselves because they were occupied at the time. Also in the Dominican Republic, advocates spoke of the huge problem of land titles. In the Dominican Republic, a lot of people are being displaced and pushed into inadequate housing by the lack of formal land titles. And so government will sell their lands, and a new owner will come and evict an individual who has maybe been living, or their family been living in that land for generations, and sometimes in some occasions. And this is true in much of Latin America. Also in Puerto Rico, which is where I'm originally from and from where I'm calling from at the moment. This was a big topic of conversation in 2017 when Hurricane Maria destroyed many homes, and many were ineligible for loans or grants because they couldn't prove their ownership in ways of that land in ways that are recognized by a colonially imposed legal system. And so a lot of these problems just didn't exist before colonization. And that was a persistent thread throughout the investigation. Another thing that was really clear is that there were laws criminalizing vagrancy and life-sustaining activities, and begging in some instances, but also a lot of these countries and their constitutions provided for a right to housing. And so while there was not a lot of case law or involvement from courts or legislatures in interpreting these laws, or data of enforcement of these laws, that created an interesting tension. You have people who you are, through these laws, condemning into a cycle of poverty that is going to prevent them from having the right to housing that you are also supposed to be guaranteeing to them, not just through international instruments, but through their own constitutions. And so through the investigation, conversations also revealed that In some places, laws criminalizing homelessness, like in the Dominican Republic, for example, the laws are not necessarily enforced, but these sectors of society were among those who ended up arbitrarily detained in jails, awaiting trials without representation or without charges, or displaced. Another thread that came up during this investigation is concurrent crises and exacerbating factors. Something that Tiffany acknowledged at the very beginning is that Black and Brown people are often most affected by the criminalization of homelessness, and that continues to be true even in places where a lot of the inhabitants of the country are Black and Brown. And so Latin America and the Caribbean do remain relatively conservative culturally, and attitudes towards race, towards mental health crises, towards LGBTQ status and migration status contributed heavily both to who makes up the population of people experiencing homelessness and how the criminalizing laws are implemented. Concurrent crises is something that is also very much present in Jamaica. For example, advocates also noted that mental health is an extremely common concurrent crisis for people experiencing homelessness. And in the Dominican Republic, as another example, Dominicans of Haitian descent make up a significant portion of those at risk of experiencing homelessness or experiencing homelessness because of their status as stateless and discriminatory attitudes from society. In all the localities, those who belong to other vulnerable or victimized communities made up a majority of those experiencing homelessness. And in each country, the violence and the social exclusion of people experiencing homelessness really only serve to further isolate individuals and entrench poverty. It was clear that really an approach that recognizes these really intersectional identities and experiences and backgrounds is what can start to begin to meet the needs that are present. And the question of what are the needs exactly leads to some of the gaps in information that were also identified through the investigation. So even through interviews with housing and homelessness advocates, it was really difficult to identify where exactly the needs are. In both the Dominican Republic and Jamaica, and to some extent in Puerto Rico, there was very little efforts from governments to even identify who people experiencing homelessness are or the root causes, and to begin to address those root causes. In Puerto Rico, there is more readily an acknowledgement that there are people experiencing homelessness, but the protective laws that it has enacted are rarely implemented. And so for all the localities, there is a lack of engagement on a level that can really impact the rights of people and just even knowing who they are. Another finding that the investigation revealed that I touched on is that a lot of the laws criminalizing homelessness are not enforced, but people experiencing homelessness experience violence from many different fronts, like the police or other authorities or even other citizens. And I think this really supports the contention that criminalization leads to social stigmatization, and that can very much lead to violence from all fronts. So criminalization of homelessness in the Caribbean is a really complex issue, and their support really just scratches the surface. And you'll hear later from Wilmy, who's working on a continuation of this report specific to Haiti, and a lot of these threads are present there as well. Some very quick, because I think I'm about to be over time, some very quick key findings for each specific country. For the Dominican Republic, the Dominican government really needs to invest in a social safety net, specifically for individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. It's really unclear what, if any, government involvement or agency is responsible for serving or working with people experiencing homelessness in the Dominican Republic. There are housing advocates, and so that has been helpful in identifying some of these key issues. But a lot of their work is focused on policy around evictions. And so that is, even then, there's a huge gap in protections for people who are being evicted and will eventually end up without homes or at risk or in inadequate housing, excuse me. And so, as I mentioned, one of the big issues in the Dominican Republic is the land titling, the lack of land titles that are recognized by their current legal system. And so one specific act that would be really useful is protections for people who have been evicted from their homes. The government needs to adopt a right-centric approach to policies related to housing, and there is no current normative framework for evictions. And so entire communities are being evicted without a place to go. And that's one concrete act that would alleviate this issue. In Jamaica has a growing population experiencing homelessness and very little to no government involvement in alleviating the issue. In fact, governments are actively moving people from more densely populated areas to rural areas to make room for tourists. And so there's an overwhelming need for social programs, mental health care, and needs on a really basic level of even having hospitals or requiring hospitals to provide care for people who are experiencing homelessness. One advocate noted that people who experience homelessness who go into hospitals are sometimes denied care because the health professionals are concerned that they might carry diseases that will harm other patients in the hospital. In Jamaica, also extreme violence against people experiencing homelessness is not uncommon. People have unfortunately been murdered and even burned. And the government responded by increasing policing, but that can be counterproductive because authorities often inflict violence upon those experiencing homelessness themselves. And so the state definitely bears the society the responsibility of protecting the vulnerable and holding aggressors accountable in ways that don't further hurt people experiencing homelessness. In Puerto Rico has an extreme lack of enforcement of its protective laws. It is among the three localities a leader in enacting protecting laws. It has a homelessness bill of rights, but there is a significant gap in implementation, and all of these laws, or many of these laws, are ignored in practice. And there's a deficit of government officials and lawyers willing to enforce these laws. There's also the piece of the complicated political context of Puerto Rico in that it's not often considered in housing. Puerto Rico is it's a territory of the United States, so it's not quite part of it, but it also is a possession of it. It's still in a colonial reality that is often not considered in housing policy. Right now, there's a current housing shortage and massive waves of displacement caused by government policies that disincentivize long-term renting and place homeownership out of reach for everyday Puerto Ricans. And so for Puerto Rico, the availability and guarantee of affordable housing is one of the biggest issues. Just to conclude, the criminalization of homelessness in the Caribbean is the criminalization of poverty, and it can take many shapes. It's more than just the laws that are enacted. The laws in the books are of course a huge portion, but many other policies and societal attitudes contribute to the perpetuation of the cycle of poverty and the isolation of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. That was a great presentation. I really liked how you highlighted the aspect of land rights because that is really significant, especially with this global network. Who's listening in right now, land rights is a big thing that's often not highlighted. So thank you. And next we have Wilmy Dessalines. Over to you, Wilmy. I think you're on mute. Sorry.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. So I'm Wilmy Dessalines. I'm a student in the joint degree JDLLM program at the University of Miami School of Law. So I was a lawyer, I'm still a lawyer in France, And when I was in France, I worked as an in-house litigation lawyer and legal auditor in various financial institutions in Paris. So now I'm interning at the Human Rights Clinic, where I actively contribute to the housing and homelessness team's efforts to address housing challenges in the United States and the Caribbean. So I'm going to present the Haitian project, which is continue the Caribbean report that Gabriela just talked about. So the Haitian project involves developing a baseline assessment of laws that criminalize homelessness in Haiti. So it is part of a larger global campaign to decriminalize poverty and status. So the Haitian project also completed the Caribbean report covering the same subject in Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. So this Haitian report, focuses on laws that penalize people experiencing homelessness, but also on protective policies that uphold the right to housing. So let's discuss the report in more details. We will begin with the resources that we use. So we conducted several interviews with different experts. So we had a permanent contact with our main partner, Kayla. In Creole, it means Comité Haïtien pour Logement Alternatif, which is a local Haitian organization advocating for adequate housing. So this organization is known for representing displaced people who lost their homes because their land was too close to the former president's residence. So this displacement didn't stop the president from being killed in the same residence by mercenaries. So we realized that these displaced people were not the problem. We also interviewed experts from international organizations such as the CRESEJ, which is a Canadian organization that produces and disseminates scientific knowledge in security and criminal justice to the public. We also interviewed the IGDH, which is a US-based non-profit organization dedicated to fighting the root cause of injustice that impact human rights in Haiti. So we also conducted independent research, notably with the help of Robin Shard, which is the director of the law library in Miami Law School. Our analysis is based on various sources. We use key international legal instruments, previous works of the Human Rights Clinic, so the works of Gabriela, expert data and documentation, press articles and reports from the Human Rights Council and other United Nations entities. So what did we finally find? So what we find, our research revealed that homelessness in Haiti is deeply linked to the poverty across the country. This housing crisis especially affects vulnerable groups, including single mothers, children, deportees, LGBTQ plus individuals, and also those with mental health conditions. Our finding shows that more 50% of Haitian children don't have adequate housing. This is especially true for Restavek, who are children working as domestic servants. They are often end up unhoused after fleeing abusive households. Single mothers also in poverty, who usually care for 5 children, often end up in displacement camps. There, they face serious risk of gender-based violence while lacking access to basic healthcare. We have also deportees returned from the US and Dominican Republic, arriving without family connection or financial resources. They became easy targets for gang violence, extortion, harassment. We have also the LGBTQ individuals who've been rejected by their families, face particularly high risk of homelessness, compounded by discrimination, social exclusion, and community rejection. And finally, we have the people with mental health conditions who receive no mental health support at all frequently end up living on the streets or in displacement camp. So we also examine the cause of homelessness in the country. So our research demonstrates that homelessness in Haiti is a result of interconnected factors. One of the factors is foreign intervention, which has undermined Haiti's stability. Three key examples illustrate this. So first, Haiti was forced to pay France for recognition of its independence despite winning freedom on the battlefield. So this payment began a cycle of international intervention and dependence. Secondly, the United States occupied Haiti for 19 years, which started in 1915. My memory is good. This occupation prevents the country from having strong independent governmental institutions. And third, we have the NGOs. They maintain a chaotic presence in Haiti since the 1980s. This became particularly problematic during the corruption crisis following the 2010 earthquake. Another factor is the ineffective response of the Haitian government to the crisis. For example, we can mention the 500,000 social housing units the government was supposed to create to relocate survivors of the 2010 earthquake. People were driven out of temporary camps, but the social housing was never built, and no alternative were offered to them. The Haitian government is also highly corrupt, unfortunately, which facilitates the escalation of violence through politically supported gangs. In 2024, due to the violent activities of these gangs, more than 700,000 people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes. So Haiti is also subject to multiple natural disasters due to its geographical location. So we can mention the 2010 earthquake that destroyed 250,000 homes and left 2 million people unhoused. We can also mention the annual hurricane season, which is usually accompanied by numerous house destruction and loss of human lives. So we also examine law that criminalize homelessness because the legislation, the Haitian legislation, it's like the legislation in the Caribbean. So they also criminalize homelessness. So like other countries in the Caribbean, Haitian laws, which is a legacy of the colonial past, use petty offenses like vagrancy or loitering to maintain social control over poor and marginalized communities. We discover in the Haitian legal framework that homelessness is criminalized in Haiti since 19th century through multiple provisions. Penalties are severe against those classified as vagrant and can range from 6 months to 2 years of imprisonment. Survival activities of people living in the streets, such as begging, are also criminalized and punished with jail sentences. Homelessness is also addressed in the Haitian Civil Code through a procedure that enables landowners to evict displaced people occupying their property. But due to the lack of formal land titles, many landowners bypass the legal system and rely on threats, police, and intimidation to remove displaced families. We discover also that the issue of homelessness is closely related to the insecurity of land tenure in Haiti. Indeed, 60 to 65% of rural land holdings are undocumented, meaning that land rights for many rural Haitians are not enforceable with the formal judicial system. However, we discover that in Haiti, there are protective laws and policies. So we have, as example, Haiti's Constitution of 1987 explicitly recognized housing as a fundamental right in its Article 22, alongside other rights such as education, food, and social security. Following the earthquake, the government established a unit for construction of housing and public buildings in 2011 and launched various initiatives to relocate displaced families despite ongoing failures to implement constitutional housing protection fully. We should also mention the National Office of Housing, established in 1982, which has struggled to deliver satisfactory results for the past 40 years, unfortunately. Additionally, we can note the efforts of certain municipalities to build shelters for street children and elderly people without family support. So despite the recent bad reputation, we can also acknowledge the serious work of certain NGOs that support the population, particularly in housing, especially where the absence of the state is so glaring. Also, as a conclusion, I would say despite all of these challenges, there is still a reason for hope, as Haitian authorities can still build upon the Constitution that recognizes housing as a fundamental right. Reforms can further bolster protections for the most vulnerable. This hope grows in Haiti's new penal code. In this penal code, the crimes of vagrancy and begging are abolished. Now we need to wait for its implementation, which has been postponed indefinitely due to the political crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wilmy. Great presentation. Thank you for highlighting the intersectional identity component of it, and how historically marginalized groups are greatly affected. That speaks back to the through line that I mentioned before, that globally the same groups are disproportionately affected. So thank you for highlighting that. I think we have about 15-ish minutes for Q&A segment. So we can jump right into that. Please use the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen if you have any questions. Let me see.
Tiffany, this is Lydia. I translated some of the questions into English, and I can just read them out here if that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So the first question is for Sam. Sam, can you share with the attendees how we can access Canadian laws that benefit homeless people? So we heard, some of the challenges there in Canada. What are the resources where our attendees can go to find some positive things?
Like to find some of the rulings and stuff, like to find out where the attendees will be getting an infographic that I'm working on. It's just not ready right now. That's going to have listed a whole bunch of resources where you can access some of the rulings that I talked about today, including some other ones. I've also hyperlinked different the encampment report from the Federal Housing Advocate, the National Housing Strategy. So anybody that is an attendee today will get access to that, and I'm hoping to have that done tonight. So hopefully that maybe that would be helpful.
Great. And along with that was a second question specifically about the law created to keep spaces where people experiencing homelessness live, how to keep those spaces clean. Will that be part of the resources shared as well?
How to keep like encampments clean?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yep.
I know that Halifax is currently working on like a code of conduct for people who are living in encampments in Halifax. I don't know of anything specifically that speaks to that type of situation with regards to encampments, because frankly, right now we're just more worried about keeping people in their tent and not having to move it rather than trying to enforce like hygienic standards, right? So I mean that's kind of like And unfortunately, that situation, that safety situation, has been used often as a way to justify evicting encampments. So I can't say that I know of anything for sure, but I do know that Halifax is looking at a code of conduct, and I can look into that and I can add that to my little infographic.
Great. We have a question now. This is for all three of the panelists from our colleague Ricardo in Guatemala, who is asking about the intersection between homelessness and substance use and addiction. And oh, my light just went off. And so the question is, if they're sort of taken out of their realities by their drug use, what examples of legislation are out there to maybe guide law enforcement who might be connected or connecting with them, and what are ways that we can best help people who are dealing with sort of substance use and homelessness and the law enforcement response. So maybe we can go to Gabriela and Wilmy first, and then back to you, Sam.
Sure. This is a really tough question because I recall during one of my interviews for the Puerto Rico report, we were talking about a law that is in Puerto Rico that I think it forcibly, gets someone to get help if their homelessness or their vagrancy is coming because of substance abuse. But one advocate noted that, substance abuse is the kind of struggle that until you're ready to receive help with it, being forced to seek help with it isn't going to do much. And so it's hard to say, what legislation can look like to intervene in a problem or an issue that somebody may not be ready for, and somebody who is affected by it may not be ready for. And so I don't know that I have a good answer for how to do it, but I do think that forcing interventions that somebody maybe doesn't want isn't going to do what we hope it may.
So, I would add something more in Haiti during the report. So we discovered that in Haiti, when people suffered from mental health condition or because of substance abuse in Haiti, there's no laws to control or to try to help people who suffered from this disease. So what happened in Haiti most of the time it's family who try to support the people who abuse substance, because the government, for the Haitian government, they don't even when the people have, they don't have any laws. They don't have any measures to protect the people who suffered mental health conditions. So unfortunately.
I'll also take the moderator's prerogative to say a lot of times we see laws and rules around something called involuntary commitment. I think they have that in Canada. I know they have that in the United States and some other countries as well. And those are very, very difficult laws because they can be used for harm rather than for, really positively working with someone who maybe doesn't have the capacity to proactively engage with the services and things like that. So that would be one, it's kind of an add-on, but we do see those kinds of legislation around there, around that intersection between substance use and mental health and the experience of homelessness. Okay, some other questions are coming into the chat. So a question from our colleague Ramya Ramanath here at DePaul University. She is asking, especially for Wilmy and Gabriela, what criminalizes homelessness is that so responses to homelessness are not geared towards housing. And so how do we, kind of forcefully speak to the point that longer term housing solutions are really what resolve this, and that criminalization of homelessness isn't going to get to the root of that problem. So we know that criminalization isn't working. How can we speak to the longer term issues, or the longer term solutions rather?
Um, uh, if we talk about the problem that we see in Haiti, as Gabriela said concerning the other countries in the Caribbean, the law that criminalize homelessness is not really enacted, so enforced. So the criminalization in the Caribbean, like in Haiti, is not really a real problem. The real problem is the homelessness. How the government can face, how the government can take measures to resolve the problem of homelessness. Even the right to housing is a constitutional right. The government really struggle to take the good measures to 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 um, to fight against homelessness. As we can see in Haiti, there's a lack of 500,000 of housing unit. So there's a lot of people in the street, and we now have a problem of the gang violence, which displaced 700,000 people. So, and also we have the problem of the geographical situation of the country. So Haiti is really a problem of government will to fix this problem. It's not a problem of criminalization. Yes, the criminalization exists because we still have a law about vagrancy, loitering, and begging, which is the inheritance from the colonial past of Haiti. But we fight against that. And what happened is in the new penal code, as I said, these offenses were abolished. But now the problems that we have, that Haiti have right now, is to deal with the homelessness. So yeah, I think it's about government will, government desire to resolve the problem.
Gabriela, Sam, do you want to weigh in on that question? It's kind of a question around narrative, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with Wilmy. A lot of times I think governments know that they're having these impacts and these effects on people. And so a lot of it is, I think, looking for an in that they will take some action on that will have an impact on the criminalization of homelessness. When you talk about concurrent crises that people are going through, sometimes if you address one of those crises, the other one might not ever happen. And so looking for those avenues.
Sam?
Just say that continuing the conversation and getting people to understand the complexities of homelessness and the realities and what creates it, and the fact that it is not a moral failing. It is not. A lot of the stuff is rooted in the old deserving and undeserving poor narrative. And the more we can get people to understand that, the more we can get people to maybe start to lobby the government and lobby their local governments. Like in Canada specifically, it's more municipal than it is anywhere else. Like my efforts and what I'm encouraging more than anything else right now is lobbying your municipal governments, radical community care and mutual aid, and trying to find ways to get grassroots efforts up. Because as we have seen, as has been demonstrated, it is a policy decision to maintain homelessness. It's also a policy decision to criminalize it. So if we can't get to them from this part, then maybe we need to start from this part and start doing the grassroots. That is where my work is taking me now. I used to be more about up here. Now I am more about the people. And like maybe we can just start taking care of each other a little better, and then maybe that'll trickle up instead of trickling down.
Great. I've got us through most of the Spanish questions, so I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague Tiffany to continue on with the English questions.
Thank you, Lydia. So we have a question from Jules. They said that the narrative in Scotland for years has been that homelessness is something that affects men. The reality is the breakdown is closer to 60% men and 40% women. Um, they are managing the change the narrative to match reality now. It has not been easy. What is the gender breakdown where you are? So I guess that's the question for the entire panel, or the breakdown of your studies, the regions that you've studied, I guess.
I can just jump in because it's not gonna be too enlightening, unfortunately, but because there is not a ton of investment from governments, or there's an absence of organizations who are dedicated specifically to this issue. And many of the countries that I looked at in the Caribbean, we don't have a specific breakdown of what that looks like. We know that it's very intersectional. There's women, men, there's children, there's people who have substance abuse issues, there's people who do not, there's people who have mental health crisis, there's people who do not. But in terms of the actual breakdown, that was really difficult to even begin to pin down.
So concerning Haiti, we studied the composition of homelessness, and what we discovered is like women represent 50% of the homeless people in the people industry, and also children. Half of Haitian children they don't have adequate housing, and as I said before, we have some children. The name they call them Restavek. It's a children who do labor, who work as a labor, you know. So all of these children, they when they flee toxic housing, they end up in the street. So when there's a lot of camps in Haiti, and 60% of the people living in the camp, they are women with children. So yes. There's a lot of women and children living, experiencing housing in Haiti. And also, we can talk about the conditions in this type of camps where gender-based violence it's really present, and and also the violence also exists by the police against these women and children. And in Haiti, vagrancy, I think the translation in French is vagabond. So it's so common that kids end up in the street that a vagabond, like a vagrant, in normal Creole is the name of a little kid. You know, that means we have a lot of kids in the street, a lot of women in the street too.
Thank you, Wilmy. I'm not seeing any unanswered questions in the chat. I think we
I can
answered.
speak real quick to the Canada thing, just if people want to know. Canada does enumeration through the point in time count now, which is something we do every 2 years. And we've been tracking the different demographics. And in Canada, I don't know the exact numbers right now. It's been a bit since I looked, but I do know that depending on the group we're looking at, like hidden homeless in Canada is where we see the majority of our females who are experiencing homelessness. We will find like the hidden homelessness population versus street, like being unsheltered or being in the shelters. Homeless, that is more typically more male, but it does see the gender changes, like the gender distinctions, or I can't say the words right now. Demographics shift depending on what group of homelessness you are talking about. So that's the point in time count, and you can access that. It's government. So you just type in point in time count Canada, and you can get the most recent stats, and it'll give you other reports that you can compare. Spoiler alert, it's getting worse. But
Thank you, Sam. One question from the chat, I think this is for Wilmy, does the Haitian government have the capacity to address the issues discussed today?
Um, we know that the Haiti is a poor country, so it's depend of the emergency, I think. But the problem that we have is then the government haven't done nothing. So the problem is if they have the capacity to do it, they never try. And also we know that there's a lot of a problem of corruption, like during the 20 after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. We know there's a lot of funds that were sent to Haiti to build house for the people living in temporary camps, and all of this money were 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 uh, were never end up to the project that they're supposed to finance. So I'm not going to say that they have enough resources, but the the resources, the few resources they have, they they don't use it like efficiently. Is what I would say.
Thank you, Wilmy. I think we are already a bit over time, so I think we might conclude here. But if there is a way that we can get the remaining questions answered following the webinar, then we'll be sure to share that with attendees in the follow-up communications. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for being here today and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you for our interpreters. Very important piece of the work so that we can reach our global network. Thank you to my colleagues who helped organize and host this webinar. And thank you to everyone who's attending and participated and submitted your questions and everything. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the recording and resources from the panel and from IGH. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.